Hello and welcome to the CleanSlate theme development tutorial series. My name is Adam, and today we're going to talk about CleanSlate file structure and theme creation rules. So, what does that mean? In CleanSlate, when we are making a theme, there are certain theme creation rules that you must abide by. So what are they? What that means is at your theme level, you must have the following 4 folders, and they must be named images, JavaScripts, style sheets, and views. Inside the views folder, you must have a folder called layouts, and inside the layouts folder, you must have a file called default.html. Inside your views folder, you must have a template called frontpage.html, and you're probably going to have a lot of other templates here too, likely one called backpage.html as well. Your theme must have a file called config.yml at the root. Your theme should have a gitignore file at the root, and your theme should have a README markdown file at the root that has your theme's name, a short description of your theme, your name, the developer's name, the Bitbucket repository URL, the site URL, so example.w.edu, whatever your site's URL is in production, and a list of required dependencies to work with the theme, and any other notes, comments, or reminders that would be helpful for someone new to the project. So in your README, it's generally advised to put just general notes about the project. If someone brand new, if you have someone brand new coming to the project, what do they need to know in order to get up and running and get started working in your theme? So real quick, let's take a look at what that looks like. If you go to github.com/wvuweb/cleanslate-toolkit, this is the CleanSlate Toolkit theme. If you remember from one of my previous videos, this is like the most bare bones theme that we used to offer people. And it's a good starting point for learning what a theme looks like. So in this theme, there are those top 4 folders: images, JavaScript, style sheets, and views. And you'll note that the images folder must be named images, not img, not image. It has to be exactly as you see it here. Same thing goes for JavaScript, style sheets, and views. They must be spelled and look exactly as you see them there. In the root of the project, there is indeed a gitignore file to ignore certain files. Like, for example, later in this series, we are going to learn about Node and NPM. And in the gitignore file, we can ignore the Node modules folder that NPM creates. We also ignore files that are created by various operating systems. For example, on Mac, they have those .dsstore hidden files. We don't need those in our repository, and many more. There's a README file, which we'll talk about here in a minute. There's the config.yml file, and there's our mockdata.yml file. We will talk more about this mockdata file later when we go into our series about Hammer and the Hammer virtual machine. Now, to come back up to our README file, a README file is a recommended file for CleanSlate because it is this file right here. It is essentially on the landing page for the repository and gives you some information about the theme. Every one of our themes has a README file. When you get your theme, you should change what you see here to include your name, the name of the theme, a short description of it, and the repository URL and site URL, and any kind of getting started tips or dependencies that would help someone new to your theme to get started. So as we mentioned before, inside your views directory, you should have a layouts directory and at least one template. So you'll notice here this theme has a couple of different templates. Here's our frontpage.html template, and here's a backpage.html template, as we mentioned before. And if we click on this layouts folder, we do indeed have a default.html layout. We're going to cover what these files do and mean a little bit later. Just know that you must have a views folder at the root of your site. So this is our views folder, and you must have a layouts folder inside that views folder with a file called default.html. In order to have a site in CleanSlate, each page also must have a template. So you need to have at least one template in here. For example, here's our front page.html. If I zip over to a CleanSlate site right here and click on a page's properties, you'll notice it says page template and front page, and it says back page, blog index, blog article. So these templates are the same templates that you see here. So front page, blog index, blog article, and back page, those are the same templates. That's where that list gets populated. So what happens if you make another folder at the root of this directory structure? Well, basically, CleanSlate will only have the ability to read files from these 4 folders. If you make another folder called like JSON or something else, you will not be able to hit that folder structure from your site. So, for example, if I were to open up, this page in a new tab, what I could do here is I could actually, knowing that we have a style sheets folder in here and there's actually a styles.css file here, I could say /stylesheets/styles.css and actually pull this up in my browser. Now, if this were, for example, say if I had a folder called styles and a file called styles.css in there, CleanSlate will not actually serve this file because the directory, the folder name would be called styles and not style sheets. So I'm hoping that makes a little bit of sense. There is one exception to this rule. If you have files that don't neatly fit into one of these 4 categories, so maybe you have some font files or JSON or CSV or something, you can create a folder called public, and you can actually have that public folder serve up those files. So anything in the public folder should not be an image, it should not be a JavaScript, it should not be CSS, it should be something other than that and a resource that you need in your theme on your site. So one last thing I'm going to talk about is the config.yml file. We're going to cover a little bit more about this in the future, but this basically holds some basic theme information for your theme, your name, a theme name and description. You can specify some default templates when you're creating pages. So when you add a new page in CleanSlate, it can specify the backpage.html or the backpage template to be the default selection that comes up in the page template select box. And you can also add or tell CleanSlate to compress and minify your CSS and to do the same for JavaScript. Other things that can go in this template are custom page data and custom site data, and we're going to cover that in a later video. So if you want to recap on what we've covered here, definitely go to cleanslatecms.w.edu, click on How-Tos and Tips, and then Theme Development. Then you can click on the Getting Started Guide and click on Theme Creation Rules, which will lead you to this page, which has a recap of everything that we've just talked about. So that about wraps up this segment. Next, we're going to talk about what are templates, radius tags, layouts, and R yield. So stay tuned.